Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait.
On the 16th of January 1991, America declared war on Iraq for its invasion and annexation of oil-rich Kuwait. In this short documentary, we will take a look at the events leading up to the war itself, and the aftermath. After the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq was left with a massive debt. When Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein, looked for a way out of this debt, a glaring option was their neighbor, Kuwait. Publicly, Hussein announced that Kuwait had been drilling more oil than they should have, as well as slant drilling across into one of Iraq's oil fields, and thus, on the grounds of economic warfare, declared war on Kuwait. Early on the 2nd of August 1990, the capital city of Kuwait, Kuwait City, was bombed. This attack preceded a short and decisive ground campaign lasting only 2 days. The main reason this campaign was so short is that while at the time Iraq's military was the 4th largest in the world, with estimates ranging from 995,000 to over 1.8 million active military personnel, the standing Kuwait army was mostly on leave and only totaled approximately 20,000 men at its strongest. What followed was immediate economic sanctions against Iraq from the UN Security Council and the largest military alliance since the Second World War. These sanctions were quite an unexpected twist for Hussein. He had been expecting the Western world to not fight back in any way due to America's recent loss in Vietnam. The battleground here was not only in the desert, but also in politics. While Saudi Arabia was a strong ally of America and also part of the military coalition, having hundreds of thousands of American troops pushing through the Muslim country could cause unnecessary issues. This was especially prevalent with the holy Islamic cities of Mecca and Medina being situated nearby. Saudi Arabia, however, had a good reason to let the American troops in. With masses of Iraqi forces building up on the border between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, the relatively small size of Saudi Arabia's army meant that if they were to attack now, the Iraqi forces would have little trouble taking over the country, and thereby have the ability to hold the world at ransom by controlling over half the world's oil. After much deliberation and offers of peace to Iraq, on the 29th of November 1990, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 678, which gave Iraq until the 15th of January 1991 to withdraw from Kuwait and empowered all states to use all necessary means to force Iraq out of Kuwait after the deadline. On the 14th of January 1991, the world held its breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution. They did not get their wish. Despite war only being declared on the 15th of January 1991, the coalition had not been sitting idle before that date. The operation, codenamed Desert Shield, had begun on the 2nd of August 1990 and went until the 17th of January 1991. This operation was the build-up of troops for and the defense of Saudi Arabia. Other diplomatic actions taken under Operation Desert Shield was United Nations Security Council Resolution 661, passed on the 6th of April, 4 days after the invasion. It placed economic sanctions on Iraq. Resolution 665 was passed a few days later. This resolution authorized a naval blockade to enforce the previous resolution. Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, Hussein was making his own moves. On the 23rd of August 1990, he appeared on television with some Western tourists who he had denied exit visas to, effectively holding them as hostages. In broadcasting this to the world, Hussein had made a crucial mistake. While the Bush administration back in the US had been demonizing the Iraqi state and its leader, they did not have much concrete evidence to back up their words. As soon as the footage of hostages was out, with the underlying message of "stay out of it," Hussein was doing Bush's job for him. While there were already troops in the Gulf set up to defend against an Iraqi push into Saudi Arabia, there was not, however, a sufficient offensive force. Back home in the US, now that Bush had the world on his side, he just had to get the American people on his side as well. The war in Vietnam was hanging over the heads of the American public. For some of them, this would be the third time in their life that American soldiers had died for other people's problems. After trying many different tactics, finishing with a conference of representatives in Geneva, Bush managed to get the action past Congress at a 52-47 vote in favor. Codenamed Operation Desert Storm, and that it was, it took off from the end of Desert Shield and ended only 42 days later on the 28th of February 1991. The force opposing Hussein's army was a deadly one. The coalition was made up of 35 countries. While not all of them committed military personnel, many supported in other ways. On day one of the open war, the coalition was fielding 956,600 troops, including 700,000 US troops. Meanwhile, the Iraqis' available manpower had been cut down a fair amount, to about 650,000 from 42 days of the most intense air campaign in history. Over these 40 days, the coalition flew over 100,000 sorties, dropping 88,500 tons of bombs. These bombs were all targeted to destroy Iraqi military architecture, from nuclear ability to communications, effectively destroying a large part of their combat machine. This strategy was headed by United States Air Force Lieutenant General Chuck Horner, who believed that they could destroy the Iraqis' will to fight by conducting an extensive air campaign. However, it was General Norman Schwarzkopf who would be making the decisions in the end. The first military action of Operation Desert Storm was conducted by Task Force Normandy. This group of 8 US Army AH-64 Apache helicopters hit their designated targets, which were 2 Iraqi radar stations, on the 17th of January 1991 at 2:38 AM Baghdad time. The goal of this attack was to remove the Iraqis' ability to detect the incoming storm. From there on in, the hits kept coming. At 2:43 AM, 2 United States Air Force EF-111 Ravens with terrain-following radar led 22 USAF F-15E Strike Eagles into assaults on airfields in western Iraq. Then at 3 AM, 10 United States Air Force F-117 Nighthawk stealth bombers, under the protection of a 3-ship formation of EF-111s, bombed Baghdad, the capital. These planes came under fire from over 3,000 anti-aircraft guns firing from the roofs of Baghdad. Meanwhile, US Navy BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missiles struck other key targets in Baghdad. The Tomahawk cruise missile's main method of target acquisition is active homing GPS. These systems work by targeting features in the terrain. The problem with using it against Baghdad was the deserts of Iraq were almost devoid of features for it to lock onto. The US Navy got around this issue by actually aiming the missiles at the Iranian mountain ranges and then got them to turn east towards their final target. Switching gear, one of the most interesting tank battles of the Iraq War is the Battle of 73 Eastings. The Battle of 73 Eastings occurred on the 26th of February 1991. It got its name from a UTM, Universal Transverse Mercator Coordinate System, north-south coordinate line. In the featureless desert, these were used as phase lines to measure the progress across the desert. This battle is also referred to as the last great tank battle of the 20th century. The battle was fought between the United States Armed Forces 7th Corps and the Iraqi Republican Guard Tawaklana Division. The main units on the coalition side was the 2nd Armoured Cavalry Regiment, 2nd ACR. This was a 4,500-man reconnaissance and security element assigned to the 7th Corps. It consisted of 3 ground squadrons, 1st, 2nd and 3rd, an aviation, attack helicopter squadron, and 4th, a support squadron. Each ground squadron contained 120 soldiers, 9 M1A1 Abrams main battle tanks, and 12 or 13 M3 Bradley armoured fighting vehicles. The Iraqi force present at the beginning is unknown, although we will see later what happened to the tanks and men that stayed to fight. Unlike battles in the style of pre-20th century, the Battle of 73 Eastings was a part of a wider line of fighting across the desert. The battle began around 4:20 p.m. The E Troop of the 2nd ACR, led by Captain H.R. McMaster, got the drop on an Iraqi company of 8 tanks in defensive positions on a slope at the 70th Easting. After taking them out, McMaster identified a group of Iraqi tanks in their Soviet-produced T-72s, holding a defensive position 3 kilometers to the east. Continuing on, McMaster's troop fought through an infantry position and moved to take out another unit of 18 T-72s. On their way back to regrouping with other coalition forces in the area, they ran into another Iraqi position, this one occupied by 13 T-72s. These vehicles were taken out swiftly with the aid of TOW, tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided, anti-tank missiles. By 6:30 p.m, E Troop had taken up a position overlooking a dried-up river valley on the 73rd Easting, where wave after wave of Iraqi tanks and infantry were advancing up the valley and attacking other coalition forces. The battle lasted only a few hours, but by around 10 p.m. it petered out. Over 100 Iraqi tanks had been destroyed. The significance of this battle was not widely appreciated until after around a decade after it occurred. The Battle of 73 Eastings was huge. The coalition forces destroyed 160 tanks, 180 personnel carriers, and 12 artillery pieces. 2 brigades of the Republican Guard were wiped out, and it was the Guard's first ground defeat, with their second to come just a day later in the Battle of the Medina Ridge. Looking back, it's easy to say that victory was guaranteed for the coalition forces, even more so when the Gulf War is referenced as the computer war due to the amount of conflict that was handled from behind a screen with laser-guided munitions. However, at the time, it was the first combat testing for many of the new technologies. A few examples would be the F-117 Nighthawk, which was used to drop smart bombs on key targets behind enemy lines. For example, the first bomb dropped in the war that flew down a ventilation shaft in the Iraqi National Air Defense Center in Baghdad, destroying it. Tomahawk cruise missiles that could be launched from a ship on the other side of the country and hit a target with almost perfect accuracy. And the Big Five. The Big Five refers to the M1 Abrams main battle tank, the M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, the AH-64A Apache attack helicopter, the UH-60A Black Hawk transport helicopter, and a new air defense system called the Patriot, a missile capable of shooting down incoming missiles. These technologies were all enabled by the microcomputer revolution. For example, the M1 tank employed a laser rangefinder and fire guidance system. What had formerly been years of training for the commander, finding the target and aiming the gun, was now the job of the laser and the computer. When the ceasefire was declared by the coalition 100 hours after the ground fighting had begun, the numbers showed how superior the coalition force had been. With only 147 fatalities in action on the side of the coalition compared to the estimated 20,000 to 35,000 for the Iraqis. This trend stays the same with wounds. The coalition forces sustained 467 wounds in action, while the Iraqis sustained over 75,000. Moving on to armoured vehicles, the coalition lost a total of 66 tanks and armoured fighting vehicles, along with one artillery piece. On the other hand, the Iraqis lost approximately 6,100 tanks, with an additional 2,600 artillery pieces destroyed. In the air, it didn't go as bad for the Iraqis due to the anti-aircraft fire over Baghdad. The numbers come to 75 coalition aircraft lost, compared to the 110 Iraqi aircraft destroyed and the 137 that escaped to Iran. As far as naval power goes, the coalition lost nothing, other than a few $100 million in ammunition costs. The Iraqis didn't get out as easy, however, with 19 ships sunk and 6 damaged. Unfortunately, militants weren't the only fatalities in the course of the war, with over 1,000 Kuwaiti citizens being killed, 3,664 Iraqi civilian lives being lost, and over 300 other civilian casualties. After the fact, we can take a look back and really think about who won the war. To quote Margaret Thatcher, "There is the aggressor, Saddam Hussein, still in power. There is the President of the United States, no longer in power. I wonder who won." The conflict here still stands today under a different name with different aggressors. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.